It's very encouraging to me that you are meeting to discuss how illicit money arising from tax scams, corporate misconduct, foreign corruption, and other wrongdoing has hurt economic development, emerging civil societies, and the rule of law. It's a real pleasure to be introduced by Dr. Fukuyama, who is an accomplished scholar, as you all know, once famously proclaimed the end of history. I'd settle for the end of abusive tax havens myself. We're actually making some progress in this area. Not the end of history, but on the end of tax havens. But the battle is far from over. And let me just begin with something of a spy story. You wouldn't expect somebody like me, probably, who Time magazine once described as balding and rumpled, to be talking about James Bond-like tales of secret codes, smuggled diamonds, and sudden betrayals. But what's happening in the offshore tax haven world reads like the stuff of a novel. It involves billions of dollars in hidden assets, secret documents, clandestine meetings, scheming in cities around the world. It involves conflict among some of the world's richest nations, and in recent months, political events have caused a near earthquake in the offshore world that has shaken the marbled headquarters of some of the world's richest private banks, serving some of the world's wealthiest people. As many of you know, for the last 10 years, we've been investigating tax havens and offshore tax abuse at the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which I chair. Our subcommittee has jurisdiction and broad subpoena authority to investigate wrongdoing. Our probe, which has enjoyed bipartisan support, has yielded a series of hearings. As the professor mentioned, reports over the years exposing how some financial institutions and professionals aid and abet tax evasion and help taxpayers dodge their tax obligations. Over the last year, we held dramatic hearings showing how two tax haven banks, in particular, the LGT Bank in Liechtenstein and the UBS Bank in Switzerland, used their bank secrecy laws to help wealthy U.S. residents conceal billions of dollars in assets in secret financial accounts, which were supposed to be disclosed to the IRS, but which weren't. Now, of course, those banks did not limit themselves to U.S. clients. They provided the same assistance to tax cheats in Germany, France, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and many other jurisdictions. Hiding assets offshore is blatantly unfair to the vast majority of taxpayers who comply with their civic obligations and have to shoulder the additional tax burden when others don't pay what they owe. It deprives government treasuries of money needed to protect our citizens and to provide the services that make our nations more secure and prosperous. In the United States alone, we've estimated that offshore tax abuse deprives the United States Treasury of perhaps $100 billion a year in revenues. Offshore tax cheating also undermines the justice of our tax systems, leading taxpayers to conclude that the systems favor those with the means to shield income from tax officials and building resentment, distrust, and anger along the way. In other nations, and in particular developing nations where legal and societal frameworks are less robust and more vulnerable to abuse, I believe these problems can be even more damaging than in the United States, sending needed resources out of the country, draining government treasuries, and poisoning civil society. But back to the spy story. It starts with Heinrich Kieber, a computer technician at LGT, which is owned by the Liechtenstein royal family. Mr. Kieber saw how LGT was helping taxpayers around the world hide income and assets and decided to expose the wrongdoing. He provided names, account numbers, and account information to tax authorities in the United States and other nations and to my subcommittee. He disclosed how LGT bankers developed code names for prized customers, used payphones to conceal calls to clients, set up corporations and foundations to hide account ownership, and used elaborate means to move money in and out of accounts to conceal the audit trail. In 2008, when his information went public following high-profile arrests in Germany, It snowballed into a worldwide scandal focusing on how LGT was helping hundreds, if not thousands, of taxpayers evade payment of taxes. For his trouble, Mr. Keeber is now in hiding. There's a warrant out for his arrest and $10 million bounty placed on his head by unknown individuals. In July of 2008, when he testified before my subcommittee about LGT's conduct, we had to use complex security procedures to protect his new identity, including taking his testimony on videotape without showing his face. Mr. Keeber's revelations shook the offshore world. He was followed by Bradley Birkenfeld, a former UBS banker who went to law enforcement officials with evidence that peeled back the curtain of secrecy, hiding UBS's years-long flagrant violations of U.S. tax law. He told of U.S. bankers who secretly visited U.S. clients to manage accounts hidden from the IRS, used encrypted computers to conceal client data, received counter-surveillance training to deflect U.S. inquiries, and opened accounts in the name of offshore corporations to conceal their true owners. He admitted helping one U.S. client hide $200 million in Swiss and Liechtenstein accounts, and another smuggled diamonds into the United States in a tube of toothpaste. Mr. Birkenfeld has since pled guilty to aiding and abetting U.S. tax evasion, and UBS has acknowledged, admitted that Swiss bank accounts opened by U.S. taxpayers held more than $18 billion in assets and income that was hidden from the IRS. The banking activities described in the Keeber and Birkenfeld revelations were so detailed, so brazen, and so startling that they fueled worldwide outrage at tax haven banks, the use of bank secrecy to facilitate tax evasion, and the complicity of offshore governments in the misconduct, producing what may be our best chance in decades to put a stop to offshore tax abuse. That's why in our spy story, for the moment at least, the good guys are on the march. In the fight against tax havens, we have made more progress in the last year, I believe, than in the previous 10 years combined. Now, together, these events reflect an upheaval in the offshore tax haven world, a growing worldwide consensus that bank secrecy laws can no longer be relied upon to carry out tax evasion. This progress resulted from bank insiders willing to disclose offshore misconduct, law enforcement officials and officers willing to pursue wrongdoing in the courts, international leaders willing to demand change. It also shows the power of congressional oversight, and it shows that the scourge of offshore tax abuse is not an inevitable evil that we have to live with, but misconduct that we can expose and hopefully eliminate. Now, the battle to end offshore tax abuse is far from over, and I am concerned that in our spy story, the good guys may declare victory and relax before the villains are vanquished. We need to take action now to be sure that we get a happy ending. We have the means to end offshore tax abuse if we have the political will to act. Offshore tax evasion currently deprives countries of billions of dollars in needed revenues, benefiting the wealthy few who have the resources to hide assets offshore while offloading their tax burden onto the backs of honest taxpayers. When that happens, tax haven abuse undercuts the tenets of fairness and shared sacrifice on which free societies rely. Tax evaders reap enormous benefits from civil society. They enjoy the security our military and law enforcement agencies provide. They invest and prosper thanks to the rule of law and the sanctity of contract, which our regulators and court system enforce. They build their economic future on the financial, communications, and transportation infrastructure that taxpayers finance. What we ask in return is that all members of society pay that share of their income that they owe, so that governments can continue to protect fundamental rights and provide basic services. If that social contract breaks down and some refuse to pay their share, The effects on civil society are caustic. Ending offshore tax abuse is about more than money. It is about protecting the principles upon which our economic and political systems are built. As Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes famously said, taxes are the price that we pay for civilization. Those who seek to avoid their tax obligations are not just freeloaders. They are weakening that civilization. But if we take the right steps together across the globe, we can finally end the scourge of offshore tax abuse.